bring in Ariel Ruiz Soto of the Migration Policy Institute. He joins us from Sacramento. Ariel, explain to us what is happening in these raids, in these immigration raids. Who are the people being taken into custody, and what happens to them while they're being held?
So in practice, many of these operations by the immigration authorities consist of targeted searches of one or multiple people found in places of work primarily. We understand there was 2 of them on Friday in downtown LA. And essentially what they're doing is showing up to a business, trying to find that person who is supposed to be, or who is reportedly to be without authorization to be in the United States, working illegally, and then detain them, arrest them, and then usually they get sent to a detention center. In this case, on Friday, they were sent to a federal building first and then to a detention center, where then they would await a deportation proceeding that will decide if they actually are going to be deported or not from the United States. The difference between these operations and previous operations by President Trump and former President Biden was that they were very visibly focused on downtown LA, a place which has, and the communities around it, which have been significantly against this type of protest, especially when likely many of these immigrants do not have criminal backgrounds except for being in the country irregularly. That's the difference here, and that's why it's really escalated significantly with the local population and the local leaders of Los Angeles.
And how long can authorities hold these migrants who are in custody before deciding whether to deport them or not?
In practice, usually it's 72 hours that migrants are detained for processing, but after that, people can be detained for much longer time while they're being arranged for their removal from the country. So it really varies on the case-by-case scenario. There are some people, especially from Mexico and Central America, because of their repatriation agreements with the United States, they actually are able to be removed much more quickly. But if it's somebody, for example, from a much farther country away, we're thinking places like in Europe or Africa or Asia, that would likely take longer, and therefore migrants would be detained for longer periods of time. The difference here, especially with the different operations, is that most migrants are not necessarily have access to legal representation, but also that even when they do, the ICE officials are not directly communicating with their agents, with the representatives quickly, or sometimes not at all. And therefore, that's creating significant layers of complication for those migrants and their legal representatives.
All right, so let's talk about how these raids and detentions have caused so much anger and chaos in the streets of Los Angeles. And of course, we are seeing a video of police firing rubber bullets, chaos, cars, at least one car being set on fire. Who are the people who are doing the protesting? And do these protests really justify the National Guard being deployed? And now we're hearing the administration is considering, or is very close to deploying Marines, U.S. Marines on the ground in downtown Los Angeles.
So sure, the reports that we are aware about is that most of these protests have been civil, they have been orderly, and they have been without breaking any laws. Of course, the same video that you've shown and others do show that there are some people, a small number of people, who are trying to break windows or graffiti buildings or other ways to try to be involved and try to reduce this type of operations or the police involvement locally. But overall, most protests tend to be civil and safe for people. Obviously, in the long term, there's going to be a significant escalation between the state of California and the federal authorities, in this case President Trump, to try to understand if this merits more militarization and more order on the streets of LA or in the future other cities in California.
Well, Donald Trump has described the protesters in Los Angeles as professional agitators and insurrectionists.
Right, and it is possible that there are some people who are infiltrated into these protests that are professionally trying to either create damage or provoke other violence in these places, but overall, the majority of people are not. It's clear that any type of violence from protesters, or in this case, federal agents, it's not justified, and therefore we'll see how that goes on forward. But at least the governor of California so far has said that the local authorities have the capacity to take control of the matter, and that is what they're suggesting will happen.
So, Ariel, what has this done to the migrant community in California, especially right now in Los Angeles? How much fear and anxiety has this created?
In Los Angeles, but really across the board in California and many other places, this type of enforcement activity with more visibility, more militarization has risen the level of fear in some communities. In some others, it's really called for more attention and organizing and protesting. We've seen in other places like San Francisco, for example, that similar protests are trying to focus on know your rights campaigns, trying to instill in people what their rights are if they are detained by ICE or another federal authority. And I think that is more like what we'd like to see in the future. But there's no question that most people, especially those who are immigrants and are here without status, are now carefully considering how to move about their daily lives and when or how to reach for legal representation in the case that they're arrested or seeking any other migration benefit.
All right, we'll leave it there. Ariel Ruiz Soto, thank you so much.